Problem statement. CMS Electronics was formerly part of the electrical component plant of the Royal Philips Group. After a change of growth strategy, Philips sold this plant and it got renamed to AIK Electronics, a German company. The company's success was nevertheless short-lived. After a huge shift in industry-wide production, both manufacturers and consumers had their eyes set on Asia. Why? Because Asia offered lower labor costs and cheaper products and components. Mr. Van Melden, then a part of the AIK Electronics company, a managing director to be precise, decided to rescue the company after realizing that the automotive industry proved to be an opportunity given the expertise and reputation the team of AIK had because of working with a multinational like Philips at the time. So then in 2003, CMS Electronics was born, an Austrian electronic manufacturing services provider, or for short EMS provider. Now, the big problem Mr. Van Melden faces is a scenario in which he has to determine the best way he can stay relevant in this industry that is changing in the Asian market, to be specific. Cheaper labor costs and cheaper components have attracted consumers and competitors to this market. In this case specifically, one of his customers that has been a customer of his previously is not okay with him outsourcing the manufacturing part of the process. So, Mr. Van Melden is now asking himself as a company, is the follow the customer strategy inevitable? Does CMS have to build an Asian plant themselves in order to keep customers that are seeking for options in Asia? Or could he do otherwise? It is important to mention that the firm's customers in the automotive sector are changing their focus from Europe to Asia, and so are competitors. Let's remember, though, on the other hand, that setting up a local factory entails a high degree of investment and huge risk for a rather somewhat small company.
When deciding on the next step and how to achieve one's business goals, cultural differences and perspectives can play a decisive role. And in this case, an Austrian firm wants to make the next move in China. It is important for us then to analyze the cultural aspects of both national cultures, and in order to determine where possible cultural misunderstandings could take place and where the national cultures align. So a few differences in cultures can be spotted when looking at the cultural dimensions of Geert Hofstede. Austria and China have vast differences in terms of power distance, where China scores an 8 compared to Austria's 1.1. This means that the cultures have a vast difference in understanding the relationships between different levels of management. And whereas Austria is more horizontal, China is more vertical thinking and places more emphasis on hierarchy. This has to be well interpreted and understood in order for successful negotiations, and also for getting a similar line of management when an eventual cooperation or deal is to be reached. The uncertainty avoidance cultural dimension provides us with an insight on how businesses from two respective countries look at risky business ventures. And in the Austrian culture, risks are not taken very lightly, and high-risk business ventures often do not have the preference. And this is reflected in the CMS Electronics' reluctance to enter the Asian market or to make a decision here. It's also reflected in their unwillingness to change their business model to a more service and customer-centered business model where individual chips will have to be produced, and rather favor the old model, which has been in place for some time. And Chinese producers are a little bit more flexible when it comes to business decisions. Another helpful tool to use to determine cultural differences is the culture map of Erin Myers. And using her cultural dimensions, we can explore more of the differences. For example, there's a difference in how the two cultures see time. Whereas Austria is very linear in its sense of time, China is more flexible. So Austrians pay more attention to a strict time schedule where there's little room for change, whereas Chinese businesses are more flexible in their scheduling. This can be crucial for planning a merger or possible joint venture, since the two companies will have to come to a time schedule in which they both can agree on and both can find themselves comfortable in. Additionally, we'll have to look at the trusting dimension, and this is perhaps one of the most crucial ones. The Central European and Germanic cultures are often more task-based, but China is specifically very relationship-based in their trusting. It is so specific that in fact they have a special word for it in Chinese, namely guanqi. Guanqi basically revolves around developing as many business networks and relationships as possible, and that business is only possible through making a lot of connections and developing a big network. And Austrians develop their work relations more on the work floor during work hours instead of doing so beforehand. But since the Austrians are planning to make a move in China, it is imperative for them that they already start developing relationships and that they already start investing in Guangxi so that in the future they may make a deal with the Chinese corporations.
Christopher Melton finds himself in a position with few possible courses of action he can take. When going to China, he had initially hoped to become some sort of intermediary, as he had already done it previously and actually successfully with another customer. However, after completing the trip in China, the German customer had indicated that they would not want CMS as an intermediary. They wouldn't see the added benefit of having CMS and just forego them by directly employing the manufacturer in China themselves. Now this leaves CMS Electronics with three possible alternatives. The first one would be the establishment of a local production facility in China. Second one being to end negotiations with the German customer, not follow them to China, and focusing on retaining customers they already have in Europe. As a third alternative, we want to propose a joint venture with a Chinese manufacturer. This joint venture would look similar to the one they already have in Hungary, and we're going to be discussing the key decision criteria that play a role and how those three alternatives would look in regards and with respect to the culture in both.
Key decision criteria, permanent decisions. CMS wants to reduce the cost of production and distribution. CMS growth revenue in the automotive supplier industry. And lastly, even though CMS have difficulties within the automotive supplier industry in Europe, they still have to break even and striving for continuous net profit growth. Conditional. CMS needs to relocate its manufacturing production to keep up with the industry's market trends and its competition. Alternative analysis. The first solution is to stabilize a local production facility in China. By producing a product facility in China, CMS has to make a huge investment by setting up its own production facility. Starting a manufacturing from the ground up in a foreign country can be very costly. First, CMS have to decide where to set up the plant. This requires an in-depth research that has to be made before building a manufacturing from scratch up. Moreover, allocating a strategic location is essential to reduce manufacturing costs and distribution costs. Therefore, CMS has to allocate an automotive hub within a region in China where many automotive and steel manufacturers have their production plants. It would be disadvantageous for CMS if the plant is located in an area without the labor resources and raw materials they need. This is to reduce shipping costs and production costs. As is stated in the case, many car manufacturers have their production plant in China. Therefore, if CMS wants to build up a local manufacturing, it should be situated in the eastern region of China, since many car manufacturers have their production plant in this area. The second option is to add negotiation and focus on retaining clients in Europe. This solution is the most unattractive and most unfavorable option for CMS business development. According to the case, many car manufacturers have moved their production operations from Europe to China. This is due to the increasing demand and legislation rules that has been imposed by the Chinese government regarding import and export. For this reason, CMS has to go to China in order to keep up with industry trends and to not lose their automotive manufacturer clients. Although there's an increasing trend toward greater manufacturing flexibility, creating a joint venture with a stabilized Chinese manufacturer would be the most favorable option. By starting a joint venture with a local Chinese manufacturer, CMS will have the opportunity to gain new insights and expertise regarding the automotive supply demands in China. Moreover, by forming a joint venture with a local Chinese partner, CMS will have the access to better resources such as specialized employees and applicable technology. CMS will have the advantage to utilize its partner expertise and production equipment such as manufacturing plant. This will expand mutual business growth since both companies will share the network, which will enable them to create long-lasting relationships. And most importantly, a joint venture will reduce the high cost of production and distribution costs, since both entities are liable of the cost of production.
So, as recommendations, we advise CMS to embark on a joint venture in China with a manufacturer. They should approach this with caution, however, and make sure that they have a good degree of control in the venture. An example of a previous successful operation that they carried out was the one in which they described that they handled all the engineering, the logistics, and supplied the right equipment to a local subcontractor manufacturer. This local subcontractor then produced the goods just as CMS wanted, but at a fraction of the cost. We believe that the differences in the cultural dimensions could also work together in this case. For example, the power distance dimension could work well because the Chinese would have a more respect for CMS's management and they would follow the instructions with more precision. The uncertainty avoidance could also work fine because this way CMS would have avoided the big risk of having to invest in a large plant, and the Chinese counterparts would not lose much either if the business does not result to be very fruitful. The Chinese could perhaps come up with other ideas with the equipment that they have obtained from CMS. Then the scheduling and the trusting dimensions, however, will require attention and communication between both parties. Then this communication must be very clear and precise in order to avoid misunderstandings and mistakes that could affect the quality of the goods and the operation. So, actions and implementations. We think there are 4 steps that they should take. The first one being that CMS should find at least 2 manufacturers so that they don't become too dependent on one manufacturer. This would reduce the risk because if the relationship turns sour, then they would have a second option ready and wouldn't be that dependent on one. Next, CMS should start working on the Guanxi with those 2 manufacturers so they can start building a good relationship. Number 3, CMS should place a small team of specialists in China near the 2 manufacturers to oversee the process and the operation of the manufacturing to ensure that instructions are followed correctly and that the quality is high as it should be. A benefit of this could be that the team will be able to intervene in case any problem were to arise. The next step, and this is the last one, is number 4, is to produce and deliver the equipment that the manufacturers will need in order and to train them and teach them how to use it. And by doing this, we believe that the case could be solved and the situation would be improved for CMS.